As Americans, we are a peculiar people. In July of 1776, after years of exploitation at the hands of the British monarchy, the Declaration of Independence was penned and published, announcing to King George III and all other tyrants with ears to listen that America and its people would no longer tolerate these injustices. It was written, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." It was evident to our founders that it was this infringement of rights that necessitated a revolt, a massive shift in the balance of power, the likes of which had not been seen for hundreds of years. These inalienable rights were more greatly expounded upon with the ratification of the Constitution and subsequently the Bill of Rights. These rights were outlined for the express purpose of protecting the American people from gross overreach and subjugation at the hands of a governing body ever again. I once swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. For me personally, and I'm sure for many of you in the audience, as American citizens, we are to be protected at all costs from anyone who would jeopardize our rights and our way of life here in America. It is our way of life and our inalienable rights that assure each one of us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that you are not a pawn to be directed and cast aside. You are not a cog in a machine. You are the embodiment of liberty. It is from this perspective that I say, any infringements on our rights are very truly infringements on us as a people. The most prolific example of said infringement immediately followed the tragic events of 9/11. This was the introduction of the U.S. Patriot Act in 2001. This act enabled government agencies like the Department of Justice or the newly rebranded Department of War and the whole might of paramilitary intelligence organizations to directly infringe upon the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment rights of all American citizens. In retrospect, this act was thrust upon a grieving nation and may be the most unashamed authoritarian power grab in modern history, the secondary and tertiary effects of which we still suffer from today. That's why I say to you all, the U.S. Patriot Act must be repealed in its entirety. I should only hope that after we review the material I've brought before you today, we can all see in what ways this act has stripped us of our rights and bring to light the injustices that sprung from this gross overreach of authority. Let's first discuss exactly how the U.S. Patriot Act infringes on the protected rights as outlined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment restricts Congress from making any laws that prohibits the exercise of free speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, protest, and petition. Well, the U.S. Patriot Act enabled the FBI to issue gag orders, or as they call them, national security letters, preventing employers or institutions from notifying people they are being investigated under the threat of legal penalty. This also infringes on due process. Provisions also enabled the FBI to investigate people for statements made while exercising free speech, and provided provisions specifically among immigrant populations to deny entry and deport them without cause due to loose associations with people seen as unfavorable in the eyes of the FBI. Furthermore, the Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unlawful search and seizure prior to the Patriot Act. To do so would require a warrant, would require due process. It would require respect and observance of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the supreme law of the land. Because of the provisions of the Patriot Act, the government was permitted to obtain personal records, to include call records, text records, internet activity, as well as personal health information without a warrant. This therefore makes all these instances illegal searches and seizures of personal information by federal agencies at the expense of law-abiding citizens. Lastly, the Fifth Amendment was so blatantly disregarded by provisions entitled to federal agencies under the Patriot Act. The Fifth Amendment provides citizens with many rights regarding legal proceedings. Most importantly is the right to due process. Due process requires that the government follow fair procedures before incriminating innocent until proven guilty, in other words. Under the provisions of the U.S. Patriot Act, outlined in sections 411, specifically, subjects weren't entitled to being informed they were actively being investigated. Private information was seized without warrants. Certain alien groups were denied due process by being detained prior to trial despite not being a flight risk. And attorney-client communication could be illegally monitored under the provisions provided. Now that the blatant illegality of the Patriot Act has been defined, let's try to get an idea of how much of our taxes go toward our own surveillance. Well, this question is almost impossible to answer by design. You see, because organizations such as the CIA and the NSA have classified budgets, and operational costs at a macro and microcosmic level are unknowable, even to the taxpayers, the financiers of these programs. Even congressional oversight committees are heavily partitioned and left uninformed of cost at an interoperational and organizational level. The published funding for military and paramilitary operations in gross terms can be found, however. This allotment is called the National Intelligence Program Budget. This is an umbrella term for publicized funding, specifically for intelligence operations conducted by the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI, to name a few. The fiscal year 2025 request for all members and sub-organizations was a whopping $73.4 billion for non-military specific intelligence, with military specific intelligence operations accounting for an additional $28.2 billion, amounting to a grand total of $101.6 billion. This does not include discretionary funding or any other forms of non-published funding, mind you. Any other information regarding costs can only be estimates by experts and published commercial contracts awarded by the government to private companies. An example of this would be AT&T being awarded a 10-year contract by the DHS to the tune of $146 million for undisclosed services to assist government operations. This is an example of just one department and one communication service provider. Under the framework established by the U.S. Patriot Act, the potential for waste, fraud, and abuse is absolutely absurd. Now, having established the illegitimate nature of the U.S. Patriot Act and the exorbitant costs on taxpayers, naturally the next question to answer would be, has it been effective? Has it accomplished what it was meant to do? Are we now more secure as a result of this legislation? Well, advocates of the Patriot Act cite it as being crucial for interagency cooperation and communication to this day to prevent terror attacks within the United States. However, I would argue that this is no excuse for the extreme extent of this overreach. This legislation was introduced at the onset of the global war on terror, after 20 years of conflict, costing around 900,000 plus lives, and anywhere from 8 to 9 trillion, according to experts. Here we have accomplished nothing other than furthering global destabilization and furthering the stripping away of our rights in the name of security. In the wake of the GWOT, we have since seen a rebranding of the parameters of terrorism, from seeking to kill people to include narcotics trafficking. The provisions outlined and still in use today has most certainly enabled agencies such as ICE to systematically track down and detain illegal migrants, even removing and detaining a man from a place of worship recently here in Charlotte. It is imperative that as a nation, we encourage legislators to repeal the U.S. Patriot Act in its entirety, for the very real threat it has proven to be to the American people and all those living within our borders. The Patriot Act and its provisions are inherently illegal. By enabling federal agencies to supersede our inalienable rights in the name of control, the cost both to the American way of life as well as on taxpayers and our turbulent economy is too great to justify at this point. and its lack of any meaningful results to stop terrorism as an ideology is a clear indicator that all it has accomplished may have once been by the people, but it is not for the people. If we should allow this to continue, all that once set us apart from an authoritarian world under the thumb of kings will no longer be what makes us peculiar. We will become all that we sought to avoid, and we will have given up all our safeguards of liberty for an ever-changing boogeyman, as told to us by our own government. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.